let's begin this morning with Iran. President Trump once again appears optimistic that a deal can be reached. Yesterday, he said the U.S. had, quote, very good talks with Tehran, adding, quote, it's very possible they'll make a deal. However, the president has indicated that a deal was close before. He's done that several times, and nothing has come of it yet. Trump also threatened Iran with more strikes if the U.S. doesn't get what it has to get. Tehran is reviewing the latest U.S. proposal to end the war. Main point of contention has been Iran's nuclear capabilities.
Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon because as tough as they are, we want to keep them alive. We want to keep all of you alive. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and they won't. And they've agreed to that, among other things.
CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro joins us now. Aaron, have the Iranians agreed to no longer enrich uranium and to vow never to have a nuclear weapon?
Vlad, we have no confirmation of that. And as you laid out, it's a pretty familiar story, a familiar position that the White House finds itself in, which is waiting for a response from Iran to its proposal. There was a reported one-page, 14-point memorandum of understanding that the U.S. sent through Pakistan to Iran earlier this weekend. And the expectation is that Iran will respond to that at some point today. And that term sheet from the U.S. Declares an end to the war and sets a 30-day window for more negotiations on Iran's nuclear capabilities, the Strait of Hormuz, and the lifting of economic sanctions that have crippled Iran in the past decade or so. As you mentioned, the president claimed progress was made yesterday and also seemed dismissive again of what we saw from Iran this past Monday, where its military retaliated to Project Freedom, that effort to escort ships that have been stranded in the Strait. But the president also acknowledged that Iran has done a 180 before and, quote, forgets what has happened. He did add that it is too soon to plan for direct talks or some sort of meeting in Pakistan with Iran, and said that there is, quote, never a deadline for negotiations. But as he has done in the past, while talking about diplomacy, he has kept the option for military action against Iran still on the table. And we saw a little bit of that with the U.S. blockade yesterday, where U.S. Central Command says that they shot at and seized Iranian-flagged oil vessel coming to an Iranian port.
So, Aaron, I think an angle that doesn't get talked about enough in all of this is the China factor, right? A close ally traditionally with Iran. The president is heading to China next week for a very high-stakes meeting that we've all been anticipating, going back to the trade war with China. Now you have the Iran factor in all of this. Do you think that he might be trying to get a deal done before that visit? How does Beijing factor into all this?
Yeah, and that meeting was postponed twice, in part because of this war. I'm sure the preference is for President Trump to reach a deal as soon as possible, though he even acknowledged it might be too soon to plan for any sort of peace deal signing ceremony next week. That being said, in recent days, China has really played a role in talking to Iran directly, getting them to de-escalate and encouraging them to reach a deal with the United States, a diplomatic solution. We saw in Beijing this week the Chinese foreign minister meet with his Iranian counterpart and pressing for the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, noting not only the impact that's happening, the impact it's having on China's oil and export markets, but the impact it's having around the globe. And as you mentioned in readouts, the two leaders said that each other's respective countries are trustworthy strategic partners. We also know that China was especially concerned after this past Monday, where you saw Iran launch attacks at the United Arab Emirates, as over 300,000 Chinese residents live in the UAE. So potentially next week in the meeting with President Trump and President Xi Jinping, you could see President Trump try and get China to continue to play a role in kind of brokering a peace deal, though publicly the president believes that he's close on his own.
All right. Aaron Navarro reporting from the White House for us. Aaron, thank you.
For more on the situation in the Middle East, we're joined by CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams, who's in Tel Aviv. So, Holly, what are we hearing from Iran about the prospects of a deal?
Hey, Hey there, Kelly and Vlad. Well, a spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry said that Iran is reviewing a U.S. proposal. But yesterday, another senior Iranian official dismissed the proposed peace deal reported by Axios as an American wish list. That proposal reportedly includes a moratorium on Iranian nuclear enrichment, as well as an end to restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz. The problem, I think, for the U.S. is that the war with Iran has at least arguably actually strengthened Iran's negotiating position, because while the U.S. is obviously militarily dominant, by paralyzing traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, sending gas prices soaring and damaging the global economy, Iran has actually piled pressure a deal to end the conflict, and quickly. Iran obviously knows that, and it will likely use it in any negotiations.
So Israel yesterday, Holly, launched its first strike on the Lebanese capital since last month's ceasefire with Hezbollah. What can you tell us about the situation in Beirut, and could it impact the prospects of a deal with Iran?
Well, Vlad, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a statement that he had personally approved the strike in Beirut targeting a Hezbollah commander. Israel's military named him as Ahmed Ali Balut. They said he's been killed, and they described him as the commander of Hezbollah's elite Radwan force, which Israel says is responsible for dozens of attacks on Israeli soldiers in recent months and is directed by Iran. Hezbollah, as you know, is an Iran-backed militant group and political party in Lebanon. It's also designated a terrorist organization by the US. Now, despite a ceasefire agreed on April 16th, Hezbollah and Israel have continued to exchange fire. Israel's repeatedly hit southern Lebanon with airstrikes, saying it's targeting Hezbollah infrastructure. According to Lebanon's health ministry, those strikes have killed over 120 people in the last week alone. Meanwhile, Hezbollah has targeted northern Israel with rockets and drones, killing an Israeli defense contractor with a drone strike last week. Israel's also occupying a strip of land in southern Lebanon, where its military has been carrying out large-scale demolitions in towns and villages. The big picture, I think, is that an ongoing conflict with one of Iran's proxy groups here in the Middle East almost certainly makes it much more difficult to negotiate a peace deal with Iran.
All right, Holly Williams for us in Tel Aviv. Thank you so much.
All right, let's bring in Jason H. Campbell. He's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and a former Pentagon official. Thanks so much for joining us. The U.S. Navy is still enforcing a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, but the White House is giving mixed signals about whether this war is actually over. So for the thousands of troops that are in the region, what is happening there? Are they just essentially on standby?
Well, partially. I think for the most part, the assets right now are devoted to maintaining this naval blockade, which is ongoing. You have now 2 Marine Expeditionary Units in the region. At least one, we've heard reports, have been used to board ships that are suspected of being under the Iranian flag thus far, but otherwise, used in very limited ways right now, but are certainly on call for any new orders. You've got an element of the 82nd Airborne Division that has arrived in the region, I believe is in Kuwait. So there's a couple of thousand ground forces, paratroopers there that, again, are on call should they be needed. But right now, it's largely maintaining the naval blockade, and for the 2 carrier groups in the region, just again maintaining some level of deterrence, and for the ships around them, ensuring that they are protected.
Well, Jason, I want to draw on your experience at the Pentagon, helping to negotiate some semblance of peace with the Taliban. What does the end of this all look like, this war? How much can the U.S. withdraw from the region? Would they withdraw from the region and still keep it protected?
I think that very much remains to be seen. I mean, what we're seeing now is, I think, this slow recognition that ultimately there's going to have to be some political accommodation here to get back to some level of whatever the new normal will be post-conflict. So the U.S. right now is maintaining its threat to use military force if needed. It's got some significant, certainly air power remaining in the region should it be called on. But ultimately, we're seeing what's been thus far a fairly slow drip of at least open source statements between the Iranian regime and now the White House, which again, with this reported one-page document, might be a step back from the 15 points it had proposed a couple of months ago that really maintained, I think, some of the more maximalist demands that the administration has been calling for now for months, if not over a year.
So you manage the NATO portfolio in support of Resolute Support mission, that mission in Afghanistan. How do you see this now, just based on your experiences? I mean, the president has been angrily pushing back on NATO allies, now suggesting that he's going to remove American troops that have been stationed in Germany essentially since the end of World War II. Would NATO have made a difference in the outcome of this conflict, this war, or are they rightfully looking at this and saying this was a war that was launched without consulting us, so why are we now being asked to support it?
Yeah, look, relationship management is a huge part of the NATO alliance. And I think in this case, the sequencing was, quite frankly, done all wrong. If the United States was seriously contemplating the war it ended up launching with Israel and had designs on doing this with the alliance, or at least with the support of the alliance, it should have and would have consulted Brussels, I think, much earlier. Now we've seen, again, the war did not go as well as the White House thought. The quick victory was obviously not going to happen. And now they're backtracking and trying to get the NATO countries to participate in a war that, quite frankly, still hasn't clarified a feasible and clear strategic ending. So never mind, in some cases, the NATO countries don't have the capabilities to exercise some of these, again, open-ended missions, such as opening the Strait of Hormuz, which is a very complicated and time-consuming and resource-intensive endeavor.
That's such an excellent point, Jason, before we go to sort of make a fine point of it, which is, I think back to President Bush in the first Gulf War and how President H.W. Bush, how he assembled this grand coalition of allies, even countries that we normally did not, at least on the face of it back then, do a lot of geopolitical strategy with. Countries in the Middle East, countries all across Europe, NATO, before they launched the attack in that first Gulf War. It was done similarly again in the wake of 9/11. Why was that never on the table? To go to our allies and partners in the region, because it's not just the United States and Israel that have had problems with Iran. Other countries, including countries that are surrounding that Iran, have had issues. Why not go to them and say, here, we're doing this, we'd love your support?
Well, look, I don't want to be overly speculative, but it seems we've learned enough now that the expectation was that this was going to be a quick victory, perhaps even akin to the success we saw in Venezuela in terms of removing the leader and finding, a more compliant number two or other senior official willing to work with the United States. So I think I would just chalk this up to really poor assumptions going into this. Not only in terms of how complicated it would be to tear down a regime, which is really now interwoven in the fabric of Iranian society, but in understanding how the Iranians would likely respond to these attacks. And what we've got now is this again ongoing level of tension, if not outright conflict, that doesn't have an easy end in the near term.
Jason H. Campbell with some analysis for us this morning. Jason, thank you very much.